It is an absolute catastrophe, I'm afraid. Everything has been destroyed. There is nothing left. It's all gone. Just like that. Wiped out, destroyed, eviscerated, gutted, completely and utterly removed from the world. It is over for all of those people near the catastrophe. I'm very sad and very unhappy with this opening. But what can I do? It's a catastrophe! Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy and we are talking Catastrophes! It is a catastrophe! An absolute and utter catastrophe, like the opening of today's video was a complete catastrophe. Well, you can't win them all. So, we're going to look at the causes of catastrophes, from plate tectonics and subduction zones, all the way through to magma build-up in the inner chambers of the ionosphere, of the geosphere, of the mantle of the thing. We're going to look at causes, we're going to look at mechanics in terms of where best to take your automobile after an accident and after catastrophe, you might say. And then we're going to look at repercussions, which is basically like drumming, but after the music is over. So your repercussion. No, all right, never mind. I'm just going to stop, basically. All right, so we're going to look at causes, mechanics, and repercussions in catastrophes. Now, catastrophes you can launch in your world, in your universe, at any time. You have the power to release a catastrophe. Why would you want to? What would be the reason for doing that? Why release a catastrophe? Well, thankfully, that's something that we're looking at. So, the causes of a catastrophe. Catastrophes don't just happen. They don't just suddenly start. One day a volcano doesn't just go, oh, I'm a volcano today. I'm just going to blow my top. They don't do that. They have reasons. They are usually volcanoes to begin with. They're not just mountains that decide to become volcanoes because they want to be different. There is a whole build-up of magma underneath, and it's a whole thing. We don't care about why. None of us are geologists. None of us care. Maybe there's a druid in the party who goes, well, I have noticed a certain geothermal energy buildup. Yeah, great. The birds are flying low, the animals are leaving the forest, and everyone is saying, get the f out of here! That is what your druid should be picking up on. Even if you are playing a bunch of... your party is playing a bunch of Pompeians, and they are wandering around, watching all of the water in all of the fountains around Pompeii and Vesuvius, in particular, and Pozzuoli and Herculaneum. They're watching all of those fountains bubble because the water's boiling. Even if they're doing that, they don't need to necessarily know the underlying mechanics behind it. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about, are they magical or are they natural? Are they something that was caused by a magical entity? Was it a mad wizard? Was it a mad scientist who has fired a laser into the core of the planet? Was it... who was it? What was the cause? If it was a natural cause, so this is a natural phenomenon, you are going to run the very big risk of your players turning around going, well, you are a dick. You caused that avalanche because you just don't like us. You literally dropped a mountain on our characters. I have done that before, but in my defense, I didn't actually cause the mountain to go up into the sky. That was caused by the players. As the GM, I was just ruling that mountains in the sky generally want to come down and land, and so that's exactly what this particular mountain did. So it did actually fall on the character. But a landslide or a mudslide or an avalanche, things like that, if they have a natural cause, you need to make sure that you have established that these things can happen or have happened in the past. It could be, as the PCs walk past a little hut next to the side of this mountain, they see an ancient mural made out of cow dung and clay that beautifully depicts a previous landslide, and everyone running away looking absolutely terrified. And the old person sitting next to the hut busy painting some more murals of now the party going up same hill, looks over and says, "Ngara gara, huh?" Meaning avalanche in their local language. Setting it up, if it's natural, is absolutely important. If it is magical, then who did it and why? You have to establish that because the party may well want to look into it. Now, there are a whole bunch of reasons why we're going to use catastrophes. I'm going to look at those later on in the video. But if it is magical, someone caused it, someone made sure that it happened at a specific time, that time happens to have influenced the PCs, there is a good chance they will go and try and investigate who did that. And you have to give them indicators that this was a non-natural phenomenon. They need to be lying in the avalanche and go, do you smell sulfur? Yes, I smell sulfur. Or did you hear the explosion just before the avalanche? I heard that too. That must be an explosion to set off the avalanche. You need to give them clues to go and try and solve that. If it's natural, you need to make sure that they know that it's coming, because if it arrives suddenly and without warning, it's going to be an issue. Tsunamis, for example, you suddenly see this massive wave out there on the horizon moving rapidly towards the coastline. The players are going to think that a druid caused it, that the merfolk caused it, that somebody caused it. They won't feel as if it's just a natural geological phenomenon that results because of earthquakes under the ocean surface causing a differential in the water pressure and all those kinds of wonderful things. We're not going to go into that. We're not going to look at it. So the idea is that you need to look at it from a natural or a magical perspective and be aware that the two of those have implications for your players. We then need to look into the next section of causes: denial and control. Was this a GM device to deny the players access to something, or was this a GM device to control where the players did not go? This is the important thing. So denial and control is not the government going, no, it didn't happen, no. No, denial is you as the GM using a catastrophe to prevent the characters from going somewhere. And if you want a great classic example from the 1950s, we cannot pass! There's too much snow at the top of these snowy mountains! We must go back through the mines of Moria! Quickly, come on! Gandalf could not proceed up the mountains of those mountains, the Misty Mountains, because there was too much snow at the top and there were ice giants and all kinds of wonderful things going on up there. But it was basically a catastrophe that could not have been foreseen, although there was some foreshadowing, not a huge amount of foreshadowing anyway. There was some foreshadowing. It was like, oh, that pass is too high, it's too risky at this time of year, we'll have to wait until spring, all those kinds of things came in. So there was foreshadowing, now that I think about it. I retract my statement. There was foreshadowing. But it controlled where the characters could and couldn't go. They had to now go through the mines of Moria. So there was a denial. No, you will not go there, but you will go there, or there, or there, or there. You will go elsewhere. So that is what denial is. Control is when it's a case of you're on a boat, you get caught in this massive whirlpool and it sucks you down into a different dimension. Or a black hole sucks you into a different dimension. Now we have a photograph of a black hole. Yay! We can now, work out that you kind of get blurry as you get sucked into another dimension. Whatever the case might be. So control allows you to reposition the characters where you want. An avalanche could be used for control. You're at the top of the mountains, now you're in the valley at the bottom, which you hadn't intended on going into. Or a chasm suddenly rips open because of an earthquake and you fall through to another space within, you fall into the Underdark, etc., etc. So decide, what are you using it for? Because if you're not using it for any reason other than a mad scientist sets off some device and the PCs are going to go and look for something, I think you're missing the point. There's so much more that you can take out of it. So you've got denial and you've got control options. Then new options. What are the new options that are now revealed as a result of these catastrophes? So when we have a massive volcanic eruption, what does that reveal underneath that part of the mountain that got blown out? Do we now see ancient chambers? When an avalanche reveals a new side of a mountain underneath the snow that was there for millennia, we now are revealed what? A landslide suddenly reveals fossils that have been long since buried. All those kinds of interesting things happen after a natural catastrophe. A fire burns through and we find something else underneath. A phoenix is reborn. All those kind of options. What are the options that are going to come about as a result of that? Think about those implications and let them be sometimes a little bit radical. Let them open up a portal to the Feywild, or perhaps the supernova causes massive static throughout all of subspace, preventing ships from going into hyperspace for a month, and now your ship is stuck. Again, that's control, but what are the new options? They start to discover that these creatures that live in subspace that have been forced into normal space because of the static, and they start to negotiate with the aliens. Oh, it's wonderful. All right, so enough about causes. So causes allow you to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and you should be, in order to take advantage of them. When we then look at the mechanics of the situation, you need to figure this out before you launch your catastrophe. I know you've got to be a responsible god. Someone has to. Someone has to. Whether it's you or it's your elf assistant, someone has to take responsibility for the catastrophe. And ultimately, it always stops at you. So, how much damage is this catastrophe going to deal? Not just to the players, not just to the PCs. The PCs, it's plot damage. So if you want them to die because of a catastrophe that you launched, well, you're a dick. If you want them to die because they get caught in a landslide, because they set it off, because they use charges which they were warned against, that's just cause. If you want them to survive because you want them to go into a new territory, or that you want them to start exploring who is responsible for launching these earthquakes and tsunamis and all kinds of things, because that's part of your plot, they should take a lot of damage, but not enough to kill them, which means you can control that. Yes, you have your power. Don't be afraid to use it. What are the other effects? Other effects. Temporal dislocation. So catastrophe could be that time resets. After a week, it suddenly inverts. Bloop. Space and time invert for whatever reason, and now we start going backwards. Or there's a major fire that burns through the area. What are the other effects that could take place? Now, the sky is so bright at night that everyone can see and move around. An asteroid impacts into the planet, and now it's so dark, it is nighttime in perpetuity. For the next 4 or 5 months, the entire surface of the planet is covered in darkness. Can you imagine the drow? All of the Underdark creatures could come rushing up onto the surface and not have any penalties at all. So what are the other effects of this catastrophe? And what are the effects on speed? Now, I chose speed rather than pacing because this has so many implications. When we talk about speed, does it allow your characters to move faster or slower about in that space? Generally speaking, after a catastrophe, it's going to be slower. An avalanche causes all kinds of rough terrain. A tsunami causes all kinds of flooding and pooling and watering and that kind of thing. Maybe a fire is the one time where they now can move straight through the foliage without having to cut through that jungle, because the jungle is now ash. But it does affect the speed. Is that going to affect your game? Is it something that you need to be cognizant of? Does it affect the speed of play? In other words, the characters now go, whoa, we've got to go back to that village that we found 6 months ago, and we've got to go and try and save them and see what happened to them because of this catastrophe. We've got to go back. We've got to find it. We've got to sort it out. We've got to go and save them. So what is the speed going to what effect is it going to have on your game? And then finally, what is the speed of the actual catastrophe? Is it something that takes months to happen, like an asteroid impact, so we are watching this thing burn through the sky for months? Is it something that happens like that? That wasn't big enough. Is it something that happens in a flash, like an avalanche or a mudslide or a flash flood? Is it something that has been established and is on a timer, such as a mad scientist's device going off? What is the speed at which it happens? So a lot of questions now come down to this catastrophe. So launching a catastrophe is not just a matter of hand-waving and 400,000 tons of highly aggressive and slightly unhappy water being thrown around. It is much more calculated than that, and that is unfortunately our job. Now, finally, we need to look at those repercussions. What are the repercussions of these kinds of disasters? Well, politically, we need to look at the repercussions because they happen all the time. In the days of yore, if you had a mountain slide and the mountain slide diminished the capacity of a country because now half its people are underground and they shouldn't be, or if there was a flash flood or if there was a fire, suddenly there could be looting, there could be pillaging, there could be scavengers that move into the area that have been drawn there by all of the corpses that unfortunately result usually from catastrophes. What is the politics now going to look like as a result of this catastrophe? Is it of a big enough scale that it affects global politics or galactic politics? Is it perhaps so localized and so small that it's only going to affect the politics of the local villages? Either way, it is still going to affect the politics, and you should reflect that in your game. It means that your inhabitants are also responding to the environmental changes that you have wrought. What are the repercussions going to be for the PCs? This obviously is either going to launch them on a quest to find out who has been setting off all of these landslides and how they've been doing it, and can they be stopped if it is some kind of madman who is doing this. If it is a natural phenomenon, it's going to slow them down, their progress is going to be slower, they're going to have to recover, they're going to have to rest, they're going to have to recuperate. Bearing in mind, a lot of game systems, the characters sleep for 24 hours. They regain all of their life points anyway. So it's not just about damage that's going to cause them to have to pause for a week. You need to look at what are the repercussions of the PCs, and then what's the repercussions for the world environment. So I have spoken about an asteroid impact where the entire surface of the planet is covered in darkness. All foliage dies off in that period of time, except for some very hardy plants which can survive without photosynthesis over a long period of time. So most foliage dies out. Algae doesn't. Algae loves all kinds of environments. Bacteria love all kinds of environments. The creatures underneath, however, suffer tremendously. Temperatures either sit stuck in the mid-50s or 40 degrees Celsius range, or they plummet to the frigid freezing range, depending on all kinds of repercussions and things. So what does the world environment change like if the catastrophe is significant in scale? If the universe suddenly no longer has light as its constant, if the catastrophe is that light now is variable in different places of the universe, what are the ramifications to that? They're huge, absolutely massive. Politically, governments, empires are going to fall apart, and new ones are going to emerge as a result of it. The PC's lives are going to be hugely impacted by the fact that they can't travel so quickly, or can now, or whatever. So all of these things add into making your catastrophe real and making your catastrophe feel as if it had a significant impact on the world and that it had value, rather than just something that a malevolent god threw at the PCs to screw around with their day. You don't want it to feel like that. You want it to feel as if it is something of significance within your campaign. At least that's what I feel when one adds in catastrophe. You can't just willy-nilly throw a tsunami at people. That's bad manners, basically. Until next time, I wish you and your catastrophes the happiest of gaming. I like the idea of an asteroid slamming into the planet. I don't subscribe to the idea that it should be an all-encompassing blanket of dust. I think we should build a tower that extends above the dust cloud, and we can charge a fortune for anybody who wants to come and ring that little bell and get out of the clouds and sit in the safe space with all of us up there. The problem is building a tower before the asteroid slams into the planet that will resist an asteroid slamming into the planet. Oi, it's very complicated destroying a world. You know this? It's very, very... it's tricky.